Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the only one speaking in English, so I have no real idea what was in the previous presentations. So it might well be that some of my stories already have been shared, and that just ignore that then. But I've been asked to talk a little bit more about the open data plans and the open data developments in the European Union. But before I go into that, I would like to sketch a little bit of what I think is currently happening across Europe when it comes to open data. I have a bit of an overview of that because I'm the community steward for the Apps4Finland platform, which is a European Commission website, or funded website, about all open government data initiatives in Europe, and we try to give an overview there of what's happening. I've been active myself in open data for about 3.5 years now, starting in the Netherlands basically as an activist, but also working with government bodies. And there was 2 reasons I got involved with open data. One is the most interesting change process that is currently happening inside government, and my background is in change management, so that attracted me. And the other thing is that all the government held data is the largest untapped resource of abundance that we have in times of where we are discussing how scarce everything else is. There's this huge amount of data resting inside government bodies that has a lot of potential. And we can use that to address all kinds of different questions that have nothing to do with the particular task the data was collected for originally. So this is an untapped resource and we have to tap into that. Now if you look at the barriers, and Petri already showed a map with the clusters of all the various barriers that we see, there are different types of barriers when it comes to opening up this heap of abundance. There's a long list of imagined barriers, all the things that we throw up as excuses to not get started. And there's a long list, as we saw in Petri's map, of actual barriers. But the biggest single barrier at this point is getting at the data. Access is our single most biggest barrier. And only when we get a little bit of access can we start exploring what we can do with it. And that's what you see in app competitions like these, that with the data that is available, usually a short list of data sets, we start exploring what is possible. And once data is out there, you see sort of tools emerge on top of that to lower the threshold for people to start working with data. Because it's not about that we already know what to do with the data. We don't. We have no clue, basically. So we have to figure out what to do with data by exploring the data, by looking at data, playing around with it. And that's why you see loads and loads of simple visualizations of mapping stuff on data, and only a handful of really, really beautiful things. And I saw a tweet in the English tweets about today that some apps actually brought tears to the eyes of certain developers. So we are also creating very beautiful things. But the thing is that we're currently still in the stage where we're doing finger exercises, and there's only a handful of people who already really know how to play a piano concert. So we're exploring, we're figuring things out, we're experimenting. So that's a transition for us as citizens. We need to acquire new competences in dealing with the data that we can now access. And a similar type of transition is true for government bodies. This is the Ministry for the Interior in the Netherlands, and they are in charge of transparency. And as you can see, they still have a long way to go by the look of that building. So it's not just transition for citizens and learning how to deal with the data, but also a transition for government bodies. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do this while maintaining the quality of service, while executing our public task, and how are we going to realize the potential that is there? All of this tells me that we're basically at the beginning. We're exploring new territory, we're exploring new skies. And that means that we have no established procedures of doing this. There is no standard mode of operation of doing open data well at this point. So what we have instead is we build social structures, we do community building, we build networks, and that's the scaffolding we use until we figure out how to embed this into everyday operation of our government bodies. And that social scaffolding is extremely important, building the community. And events like these, apps competitions, getting together in one room is extremely important as well. The guys you see in the picture here, just as an example, the guy in the middle is the Dutch project leader for the national data portal. And he has a portal and not a whole lot of data. So what he does, he puts civil servants that supply him with data in the spotlight, and those are the guys in the blue shirts. one from the Ministry of Education who opened up school data, one from the Ministry of Economics, one of the Ministry of Agriculture who opened up farmers' data, and one from the city of Nijmegen. And these guys in the blue shirts are the rock stars of this movement at the moment. We need these guys to get government to open up and learn how to do this. And it's building applications on top of the data is really cool, so developers are rock stars, but these civil servants are also sticking their necks out and are the rock stars that we should be celebrating. Now, the reason the European Commission is behind open government data is because they see huge economic potential. And they throw around very big numbers, like 27 billion, they said in 2006. Meanwhile, we're up to 140 to 200 billion euros a year in potential benefits. So that's about 1.7% of the national, of the European GDP. And so these are big numbers, but big numbers don't really mean a whole lot to me on an individual level or to you when it comes to your own company or your own government body. So the real proof of what's happening with data is still very, very marginal. What we see is that when you open up data, it's new companies, small companies that benefit the most of it. And that's always at the low end of markets. We're exploring new territory, like I said. So we're also finding new ways of building economic value out of this data. And that's just the economic value. And I think the bigger potential is actually in the social value of it. But it's at the low end of markets. So, and these activities there, they will grow. They will move upwards to the higher end of the market, but they will change the market along the way. So existing companies who are reusing information from the government see their own markets disrupted right now. If I put that all together, what I see is that the PSI reuse, public sector information reuse debate, is not new itself. That's decades old in Europe. Reuse itself is as old as government information collection is. And existing companies have been lobbying the EU for decades to open up information or to make it easier to reuse government information. And now it's happening, but it's happening as the open data movement and not essentially in the way that maybe existing industry wanted it to be. So what we see is that the term PSI reuse and all the discussions about PSI reuse are moving closer to the definition of what open data is, which is access with no technological, no legal, no organizational barriers and free for everyone to reuse in any way they see fit. So we're moving closer towards the open data definition, and you see it in things like licensing. Various national governments are moving to central licenses that are equivalent to the public domain dedication or Creative Commons Zero, and they're removing all kinds of restrictions that were there. And we see it in the demolishing of revenue structures and revenue models that exist around data sets. So there's two ways you can make money from government data. One is to charge people for registering data, and the other is to charge people for accessing the data. And you see in different countries these type of structures being demolished. This is an example from the Netherlands where the geodata set that you could access for 50,000 euros is free from January 1st on next year. And this means a disruption of existing ways of how these government bodies work. So now they get paid out of general revenue and not by selling the data. But this is moving government closer towards the open data definition. And all the examples that we've seen, all the entries into this competition, all the experimentation that is taking place, all the companies that are already building apps and selling added value services on top of data, what it means is that we see a mass accumulating. We see a momentum building that actually, to me, sort of creates a gravitational force. And under that gravitational force, distinctions are blurring. It means that discussions that were previously very relevant, also at the EU level, about the difference between access to information and reusing information, all those differences are going away because there's no real way we can make that distinction anymore. If I have access to information, for all intents and purposes, I'm already reusing it in some way. And the same goes for if I am for the motivations behind publishing data. Am I publishing my data as a government body because there is a transparency demand? Then you will see that the same information will also be reused for commercial and non-commercial purposes. And if I am releasing data as a government body because I see the economic potential, you will see the same data will be used to increase transparency of your institution. So those distinctions are blurring, and you can see it in the way that the European Commission talks about PSI reuse. They are equating PSI more and more to open data, even though originally these are quite different things. So if you look at what the Commissioner Kroes, who's in charge of the digital agenda, and open data falls under that, what she's saying, she says things like yes to open data, and we are going to open up, we're going to break open the public sector in Europe. She builds expectations as to what open data is. Expensive data is not open data, and it should be routine of getting data out under reasonable conditions. So she's sort of setting the scene. And of course she does that because at a European level we have the PSI directive that specifies sort of the legal framework for reusing government information. And that PSI directive has been around for a number of years, has been implemented in national laws everywhere, and we're now coming up to a review of that directive. Should we change the rules of the PSI directive, what it prescribes? Currently it's worded kind of fake, so it sets sort of the minimum conditions that nations need to create for people to be able to reuse government information. And should we change that? We don't know yet, but there's a number of topics that might be up for review, from obvious ones like clarifying the principles, what are we talking about, to things like extending scope. Currently, cultural heritage information, public broadcasting information, all those type of things, scientific information is excluded from the PSI directive, does not fall under it. Should the scope be extended? Should it be included? What about cost and revenue models? Should the PSI directive prescribe more what is allowed and what not? Should it do prescriptive? Should it have prescriptive rules for how to license data? Now, all these questions we don't know yet what it's going to be. We only know that next week there will be a press conference by Nelly Kroes where she's going to talk about the PSI directive review. And the title of the press conference is "The EU Decides on an Open Data Strategy." Now, that again sounds promising, but we won't know for another week whether there's actually going to be more prescriptive ways of dealing with PSI reuse in the PSI directive. And even then, when we get to a PSI directive review, it will take years before it will end up in national legislation. So that might be 6-7 years down the line before we even notice it in local rules. So this is, in essence, currently more of symbolic value to us than any practical value, I would say. On a practical level, the EU is also moving ahead. They want to start their own data catalog. The EU has also a tremendous amount of information. Google Translate is being fed with all the documents that come out of the European Commission and European Parliament. It's a very interesting reuse of government information because they use it to train their translation algorithms with. So it's time that that we get a European data portal where you can find EU sourced data. But that's not all they plan to do. They want to turn that eventually into a pan-European data portal. That means that they aim to start aggregating and federating all data catalogs in the EU so that you have one point of access to find relevant data sets from different member states, from different government bodies on a topic that you're interested in. I'm very curious to see how they are going to do that because that's a very ambitious project. But it's, I think it's pretty cool that they want to try and do it. And their ultimate aim is to get to a service infrastructure for open data across the EU, so the portal is just the first step. That sounds promising, but looking forward, I think there is an issue that is not being dealt with in any of this, but that is sort of the biggest challenge for us as individual civil servants and as coders and as people who are interested in realizing the potential of open data. And that's avoiding what David Eves, and we saw the picture earlier in Petri's slide, what David Eves calls the compliance trap. A lot of open data efforts right now, where government bodies start publishing data, they start doing it because somebody else asks them to. In the UK, there's a lot of top-down political pressure to create more transparency, and that's why local bodies are starting to open up their data. In other countries, like the Netherlands, economic potential is more prevalent as an argument. So it's the ministry that says, start opening up your data. But if you're doing it for somebody else, because somebody else is banging at the door, give me the data, show me the raw data, there's a high likelihood if something happens, if a crisis hits your public body, if there's a budget cut, that you will strike it down as a luxury and not as a necessity. So we have to make sure that when public bodies are doing open data, they are not doing it to comply with the desires or rules somebody else gave them. We have to figure out ways of making open data make it valuable to the government body where the data comes from. You can look at efficiency measures and you can look at effectivity measures. And a great example to me on how open data serves as a government instrument is in the International Aid Transparency Initiative. They don't even call it open data, but they're doing open data. What is happening here is that an entire sector, the international aid sector, is opening up their data to make the entire sector more effective in what they're doing. This means that donor countries, foreign offices, are opening up financial information about aid projects that they are doing elsewhere and how they fund the NGOs that execute those projects. The NGOs in turn are also opening up their information. Where exactly are we spending the money? In which countries are we building schools? In which countries are we doing emergency relief aid? In which countries are we building roads or whatever? The thing here is that these people realized that in order to work differently, they had to start using different tools. They wanted to be more effective as a system, as an ecosystem. And they realized they needed new tools to be able to do that. And opening up their data is such a new tool. And I think that's a general rule of thumb. If you want to change the way you work, and a lot of government bodies are under pressure to actually do that, then you have to look towards new instruments, and open data is one. And that means that with open data, ultimately, we're talking about changing the way that government delivers services to the public and the way that the public interacts with those services. This website, ourservices.eu, is part of a research project that looked at collaborative e-government services. So services where citizens build applications or services using government data, or government provided the service using citizen-generated data. So they build the service together. And the thing here is that most of these services become more valuable when more people use them. We're accustomed to public services where when more people use them, either the servers go down or they become more expensive to maintain. If more kids go to school, classrooms grow bigger if you want to remain at the same level of cost. And traditional eGov sort of neutralizes that. When more people use traditional eGov services, the cost stays the same and the quality of service also stays the same. But with these collaborative services, you actually see services where the quality increases because of the number of people that starts using it. So you get a networking effect for government services. And we can use data to change the way we have discussions as citizens with public bodies. This is a picture from my hometown, and we have a department that's responsible for maintaining all the green areas and the parks and sort of cutting down the trees and stuff. And they, every year basically, they run out of money in September. And then you have a couple of months left, so they always come up with the suggestion, maybe we should involve citizens in helping us out with the maintenance of green spaces in our city. Now, when a civil servant comes to me and asks me, would you be willing to do that? I will probably answer, I don't know. I have no clue. Because I don't know what type of maintenance this department is doing in my street. How often do they cut the grass of that green patch on the corner of the street? How much does it cost them? 2 minutes, I'm nearly there, no worries. In order for me to be able to have a sensible discussion with my government, whether I want to be part of that or not, I need to have the data about what is actually happening, because the data is the object of discussion there, and not my basic willingness or not. Because only if I can establish that I can actually save the government money by doing something that costs me 10 minutes, I will be willing to do it. But if I spend a week with my neighbor and it saves the city 200 euros, I'd probably rather have they raise my taxes. So in order to be able to discuss the trade-off, I need the data. So data transforms the conversation, and data basically becomes then an object of sociality, which is a term that Yuri Engerstrom of JICU introduced into social media a couple of years back. So I think concluding, what I'm saying is that moving forward, we have to sort of work more closely with the rock stars in the blue shirts that we saw before and with the developers, and we've only just started. So basically, this is an invitation to a dance. We've only just become. The party is today, but the hard work starts tomorrow. And if it's about building new government services, maybe that should be a new category for participation in the competition next year. I would like all of you to invite you into the Apps4 platform as well, because that's the place where you will meet developers and politicians and public servants from other EU countries. And there's many examples around from other countries, and we just can't find them because I don't know how to search in Finnish or to search in Bulgarian, and you probably don't know how to search in Dutch. So this is a place where we can sort of find each other halfway. Thank you very much. Slides will be online and are reusable, of course.
Very good. Thank you. So we'll hear some news from Neely Cruz on late November. Who's going to Brussels then? We probably should send somebody over there. Okay, questions for Toon? Yeah, there in the middle of the hall. The man in the red shirt.
What is the, you mentioned somewhere that there has to be a way for the governments to eventually make money out of this data, and the whole question is when these applications are built. For example, when I look into what they're doing in US, it often seems that the companies are actually trying to charge for the same data that the government is providing for free. And how do you solve this problem? Because eventually it will come down to the same thing that the internet came in the late 90s, which is how, what is the business model for it? How do you actually make money out of it?
Okay. I don't think I said government needs to be able to make money. I said it needs to pay for the public sector body that publishes the data. What I meant by that, it has to have value for the publishing entity, because otherwise they might easily decide not to keep doing it. Yes, there is currently a lot of, also in the existing PSR reuse market, a dominant business model is actually charging for access to data that they have access to and you don't. That probably is going to exist for a longer time, especially if it's about ease of access. I think that's a valid business model towards the future as well. If I can speedily get access to some data because somebody provides it as a service at charge, and it saves me going to hunt for it in a government website, for instance, that might be a viable business model. If I'm not in a hurry, it's probably not a good business model. New business models on top of data, basically we don't know yet what will happen. We see a couple of new roles emerge. You see new mediators emerge as a role, creating a place where people can share data sets that they have found inside the government body. They changed it, restructured it, made it more reusable basically, and then republish it. And there's intermediaries there that provide a place for doing that. Probably the same is true for citizen-generated data and company data, that there's a market for basically info-mediators there. Other activities, when you look at apps building, we probably don't even know how it's going to work out. So we'll have to wait and see. It's part of the exploration that we're doing, I guess.
Thank you, Tom.